apprenticeship numbers have fallen drastically within the last 10 years, almost as much as 20%. That means the skills gap within the construction industry is widening. Within the next 10 years, it's quite likely that the UK will have a shortfall in actual trades. Especially with the addition of AI taking away what will be a lot of people's jobs in the future, having a trade has never been more attractive to ensure that you safeguard your future. So in this video, I'm going to break down what it takes to become an apprentice, what employers may expect of you. We'll deep dive into your foundations and attitudes you should have, the types of things that make someone a good apprentice, and what you can do then once fully qualifying from being an apprentice to make sure that you're being the best engineer you possibly can be. So stay tuned, watch this video till the end because you don't want to miss out on the valuable information that we'll be giving. So one of the first things is how to become an apprentice, how to get yourself an apprenticeship. Now, like I said, we get a lot of phone calls from young lads around about 17, 18 who've just left school and are looking for an apprenticeship. They're very nervous on the phone. They, end up sending over CV with lots of spelling mistakes, lots of information missing. So my 3 top tips when contacting an employer: definitely a phone call, I think, is amazing. When I do get a phone call from a potential apprentice, it goes a long way because we've now entered into a world where everything's hidden behind the internet and, digital. It's still very nice to get a phone call personally from someone who's looking for a job. Secondly, the CV has to be spot on. No spelling mistakes, lots of detail, being very specific on what your skill set is. Even if you've just, say, worked in a cafe and you've, explained how well you've done, how you work as a team. And thirdly, if the company that you are contacting has offices, even go out of your way and visit the office. What this can do is set you aside from, the average young people who are actually just sending a CV in. It will set you aside by 1, making a phone call, 2, dropping it in, and then 3, finally sending over an email with your CV saying, "Thank you for taking the time to have a chat with me today. Please see my CV attached. I would really appreciate an interview for the opportunity to become an apprentice with your company." Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the foundations and attitude. So before qualifications, before tools, or even before boilers, the first thing we look at is attitude. Having the right attitude is absolutely crucial to becoming a really good apprentice. So many companies will go through apprentices quick because the apprentice may be, going on their phone, where they, the periods of them being quiet and not having something to do, getting up late. So this is probably one of the most important things when you've landed yourself an apprenticeship, is if you've been told you're going to be picked up at 7:30 a.m, you need to be up and ready by 7:15 a.m. You need to be ready to go. Not just rolled out of bed at 7:28 and then throw on your clothes and get straight into the van at 7:30. And this is because, rolling out of bed and going straight in the van, think about what your attitude is going to be like. Although that's not the time you're going to start, because you're then going to travel from your pickup point to your job, you need to have that sort of relationship, that rapport with the person that you're learning with. So really critical that you're up and early every time. Get yourself into a routine of going to bed at a set time, getting up at a set time, and before long, with routine, that becomes the norm. Now, listening properly is another crucial part of being a good apprentice. Right now, we have more distractions than ever before from when we were younger. You have the phones, constant notifications binging off, Facebook, Instagram, what's the other one? Snapchat, all these things binging off. And what can happen is you get asked to go and pick something up, or you get asked to go and do a task, and because you've then not listened properly, because you've got so much information bubbling around inside your head, you can make mistakes. You can bring the wrong thing back, or you could execute the wrong task that you've been given. all these things then, by not listening properly, starts to infuriate your mentor. So making sure that once you're in work, you're present, and your attitude to, listening properly is completely spot on. And that brings me on nicely then to asking questions. A good mentor will never be against a learner asking lots of questions, because by you asking questions, that's how you learn. That's how you craft yourself to be a really good apprentice. It's one thing to just being shown something a couple of times, but if you don't question things, if you don't ask why that's working in that way, if you don't ask, if I do it that way, what will happen? Really explore the reasons behind why you're doing specific tasks. And finally, on your foundations and attitude, taking pride in your job, even when it's the boring stuff. So if you are just moving, a load of materials from point A to point B, really take pride in it. Don't just pick up those materials and just sling them into the corner. So having the right attitude and taking pride in what you do as an apprentice is really important, because we can teach you the skills, but what we can't teach you is to care about being a good apprentice. So the next point we're going to talk about is personal presentation, taking pride in your appearance. And why this is so important is because, firstly, your personal hygiene and appearance matters. Another really good point is if you're working in someone's house, especially like customers, like a customer-facing role, that if you're going in scruffy with your hair all over the place, uniform really untidy and messy, that it can give off a really bad impression to the trainers or company's personal image. Now, I know all these points may seem as though it's quite a lot to consider and take on, but of course it's going to be. If you think you're going to be able to just turn up and be an apprentice for a company with the wrong attitude, with the wrong appearance and everything, if you think you're going to last long enough, then you're very much mistaken. There's companies and businesses and people like myself who take on apprentices and will very, very quickly get rid of that apprentice if you're not, being a really good apprentice, really. Because the way right now in the UK, the government has not made it easy for companies to employ apprentices. Back, 15, 20 years ago, the main route of becoming an apprentice was you go to college, you do day release or month block release on site then with your employer, and it would all go hand in hand, the theoretical side in college and then the practical side with your employer. That seems to have changed massively, and now you tend to find that a lot of learners are just going to college, doing the plumbing qualification, and then are really struggling to get themselves an apprenticeship with a company. So this is why doing all these little points that I'm saying may seem like a lot, but if you stick to them, it'll make sure that you have a really good future within the plumbing industry. Okay, so next we're going to talk about core plumbing principles. Once you've started and you've managed to land yourself an apprenticeship, what you need to do really quickly is try to identify all the plumbing parts, elbows, T's, the different size pipes, the different types of fittings, and the different types of tools that would be needed to cut or use in with those materials. So identify your materials and tools very quickly. We're also going to want to learn how to drain and fill a system. Once you've done it a couple of times with your mentor, this will really help the mentor then in you being able to do this type of task, which will free them up to do something a little bit more important on the job. This then goes hand in hand with being able to spot issues like airlocks, leaks, or pressure issues within a heating system. Now, of course, you will cover these things on your plumbing course within college and with your mentor, but by doing a bit of research yourself before even starting your apprenticeship and into how to do these things like draining heating system and identifying leaks will help you and will really show your mentor that you're really passionate about being a really good apprentice. Gas qualifications. Okay, so now this is where things get serious. Now, when you're dealing with gas, it's something that is very, very important to do correctly, because you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with things that one mistake and you could cost yourself your job, or maybe even worse, someone's their life. Now, when I was in school, I was never really very academic, and maths probably wasn't one of my strong points. However, with gas, you really are going to need to switch on your brain to, as there's a lot of maths involved with the gas. So, you know, having a good foundation level, getting good GCSE grade within maths, I think is pretty important, especially if you're going to pursue the full, you know, plumbing, heating and gas engineer route, because, like I say, there is a lot of legislation and rules within gas, but also there is a lot of maths to consider. So next, I think it's important to talk about what sort of salaries that you could probably expect from being a plumbing engineer or even a gas engineer. So when you qualify as level 2 plumbing, you can expect anywhere from sort of £25,000 to £30,000 per annum. That's dependent, of course, on location. You may get a little bit more in places like London, but ultimately you'd be looking anywhere between sort of 25 to 30, 32,000 per annum. So then next, when you become gas qualified, domestic gas qualified, you can expect anything from sort of 33,000 right up to 40,000, depending on your level of experience. So the longer you've then been a gas engineer, the more you could negotiate for a higher salary. Then if you go on to start to run your own business, so, you know, actually running a plumbing and heating business yourself, you can basically, there is no limits then to how much you can earn, whether you just stay as yourself. You could earn anywhere from, you know, to 100,000, 120,000 to maybe even then taking on a small team where, you know, the money could really significantly increase. Obviously, when you do become a business owner, you have to realize that it's, you know, those turnover figures of 100,000 plus are not what's going to go straight into your pocket, because you've then built a machine that is going to continually churn over, and you have to pay various different overheads and all that sort of stuff, but that is all for another video. So there are many different types of plumbing apprenticeships that you can have, from a new build plumbing and heating engineer to commercial plumbing and heating. You can even get domestic, so what we would call house bashing, and that's where you go into customers' homes. And there really is a very varied range of different apprenticeships you can have. There's pros and cons with each different one. So, for example, like new build plumbing and heating becomes a little bit like a production line, because you go in each different house, each different flat, and it's the same sort of blueprint. So you're doing the same thing day in, day out until you perhaps move on to a different building site. There's a lot less problem solving skills needed for a new build plumbing and heating apprentice. For a domestic house bashing apprenticeship, there's a lot more problem solving and thinking that you need to do, because you're retrofitting inside a house that is already being built. You then perhaps lifting up floorboards and finding issues that you then have to get that pipe around to get it to where it needs to go. So definitely a lot more problem solving with that. And then commercial plumbing and heating is another level again, and this is where, if you're a commercial gas engineer, your salary can really hit top heights. Can't really give you the pros and cons to commercial plumbing and heating, as I've only done a very small amount of it, but be prepared to be using a lot bigger materials, and can be a lot more dangerous in certain circumstances. So you've done your apprenticeship, you have your level 2 plumbing, you've started your gas, or maybe even you've qualified in your gas, and you know how to install a gas boiler, commission and test and everything, and that's great. But boilers, and this is the next level now, and fault finding and diagnosing boilers. I strongly recommend that once you do complete your gas qualification, that you get yourself onto as many boiler manufacturers courses as possible that will help you to identify and diagnose faults on boilers. Now, there's not a huge amount of, again, depending on the apprenticeship that you take on, based off the last conversation I had about the different types of apprenticeships. If you don't do an apprenticeship with a mentor, I guess, that is going to teach you how to diagnose these boilers, it can be really difficult to gain that experience. Personally, myself, I didn't have someone teach me diagnosing boilers. I've had to pick it up myself and do boiler manufacturers courses like I'm explaining to you here. And I mean, what's really important when working on boilers with replacing parts and fault finding and stuff is really following exactly how to do it correctly, because there's no room for error. If you put a part in the wrong place and then fill the water back up in it, the likelihood is going to leak or even break. Quite recently, I've had one where I made a huge mistake and done wiring slightly wrong on a boiler repair and blew the PCB board, which cost me a couple of £100. So you really do have to be really switched on when it comes to boiler fault finding. Okay, so not only in this video have we given you valid points on how to become an apprentice, but also how to be a really good apprentice. I've also given you a tour of Caerphilly. So if you've picked up any value from this video, please hit the subscribe button, give us a like, and maybe even leave us a comment to let us know what your thoughts were of the video. So my final thoughts are, don't see an apprenticeship as a job or a chore. See it as a real opportunity to make a difference within your life. Because one thing I will say, once you have a trade as a skill, it's something that no one can ever take away from you. AI is going to eventually take a lot of people's jobs. Having a trade is something that AI really cannot take away. It's something that AI and bots and all that sort of stuff, they just simply will not be able to do what a tradesman are able to do. And with the ever-growing skills shortage gap expanding, now has never been a better time to really embrace becoming an apprentice and a tradesperson. So take this opportunity to have the right attitude, the right mentality towards it, keep yourself clean and presentable, and strive to absorb as much knowledge from your mentor, from your books and your studies as possible, to really master your craft and your trade, to make yourself and give yourself the best opportunity you can within the plumbing and heating industry.